You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
Welcome to Skytalkers. Here are your hosts, Charlotte and Caitlin.
Hello, and welcome to Skytalkers. I'm your host, Charlotte.
Hey, everyone. I'm your other host, Caitlin, and welcome to this week's episode where we are talking all about Andor. What? Isn't that show over? Yes, we're talking about Andor, but we're also talking about Rogue One.
Yes, and specifically the transition from Andor to Rogue One.
Yes,
we have things to say. And also, we have more to say about Andor after the series wrapped. As it goes on, you sit with it for a while, you think about the series as a whole. So we get questions from listeners. We want to address them, things we missed. We have things to go through. So that's this episode.
Yep, that is what we're talking about this week. And it's exciting because Charlotte and I actually got to go to San Francisco last week. Was that last week? Yeah, last week.
Yep.
And we got to go to a special screening at Lucasfilm on the Presidio in San Francisco to watch episode 12 and then immediately watch Rogue One, which was kind of a crazy experience. I really lost it watching Rogue One this time. Thank God our friend had some tissues that she gave me.
Well, no. I went to the bathroom to grab those. I missed the beginning of Rogue One for that. Okay,
you did. yeah, you did. But Tori had also given me a tissue.
Oh, well, I missed that.
Yeah.
Cool. Great.
You were gone. You were in the bathroom. You weren't back yet. It was like she might be gone for good. Who knows? But that was a really fun, very short little trip for us. I think we were in San Francisco for 48 hours, a little more, 48 and some change. But that was really exciting to get to have that viewing because, as you know, everyone I think has kind of been talking about on the press tour for Andor about this specific transition from episode 12 into Rogue One and how it was going to change a lot of things. And we definitely talked about this a little bit when we covered the finale arc a couple weeks ago on Andor, but to really sit down and focus on episode 12 and, all of Andor into Rogue One was a really special experience. And to be able to do it at Lucasfilm was really cool. Yeah. And we're really lucky we were able to do that.
Yeah, super, super lucky. And one thing we've talked about before when we have gone to Lucasfilm to watch something before is that the sound mix that you get, it's not even the sound mix. I think it's the same sound mix that you would get in the theater, but these theaters at Lucasfilm and at studios in general are just so well fit for sound that I felt like I was hearing things I've never heard before in Rogue One. It was crazy. But I feel like the experience of going from episode 12 to Rogue One really hit so hard. It's the music blasting, you watching it all together. It's a crazy 3-hour experience.
It is. It really is. I think there's a part of me that almost wants to do this transition again, but honestly to cut out the beginning of Rogue One with baby Jyn, because I do think that kind of, when you're thinking about just the transition from Andor into Rogue One, to go straight from Cassian leaving Yavin 4 to him meeting up with Tivik with kind of nothing in between, I think that would be a really great way to watch it as well, to kind of cut out that flashback in a lot of ways, because I think that kind of slows a little bit of the momentum. But, it's all still there. It's all still great. But I think it would be fun, like on future watches, to kind of fast forward through that part and just kind of really see that transition for Cassian from Yavin 4 to Tivik and getting that information about Galen.
Totally. Yeah, I want to do that too. I actually had the same thought because I agree with you that while I do still maintain that Rogue One is Jyn's movie, I think that when you're watching them all together with the Andor in mind, with the viewing of we're coming from the Cassian story into Rogue One, like it's a cleaner transition if we don't start years before with little Jyn.
Yeah.
But it's important context for Rogue One, so I understand why it's there.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I found that I was seeing Rogue One with new eyes. This is, I feel like, a feeling that is shared among a lot of Star Wars fans now. It's something that Diego Luna and Tony Gilroy sort of hoped for. When I watched this movie, I just was noticing things I'd never noticed before, different reactions, different intonations into different pieces of speech. But what stood out to you in this viewing?
I think what I think is crazy is that Andor has really heightened the urgency of Rogue One, which is kind of crazy because Rogue One has always been a very urgent film in that regard. You think about like the Master Switch, right? Like that track and everything. Like I feel like Rogue One has the essence of the Master Switch track all the time because they're just like building up to receiving the Death Star plans. And, you know, especially in the back half, once we get to Scarif, we're kind of losing the members of our crew one by one, right?
The
There's
Deus Irae of it all.
exactly the whole
We're
film.
experiencing that the entire movie.
Yeah, and Rogue One does that the best of any Star Wars movie, I think. And so the fact that Andor as a show can kind of up the ante on that feeling specifically with Rogue One, I think is crazy. I think it injects that sense of urgency into the first half of the movie that is there, but doesn't really soar until you get to Scarif, I think, before Andor. But I think with Cassian and you know, literally 24 hours ago, Luthen has died. He's got this information about the Death Star. He's hearing whispers about this man named Galen. And then he gets to the Ring of Kafrene, and Tivik says the name Galen. And it's like, he's like, what? It's like it's all coming together, and I think
Mhm.
you feel that energy. I think a lot, like the energy has shifted, I think, especially in the first half of the movie for me with Rogue One in regards to Cassian, because I think we can read a lot between the lines now about how he's feeling, what he like we know what he knows now at this point, and I think you can kind of see the wheels turning. We can infer the wheels turning in Cassian's head as a character in a way we definitely couldn't before.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the intonation of Galen Urso,
Mhm.
what is it really is crazy the first time you see it after Andor. And we talked about this in our finale discussion, but I feel like as the weeks have gone by, I've seen a lot of people on both sides of Rogue One has forever changed and people like versus people saying Rogue One kind of it didn't change for me. It's still just a good movie or like a fine movie, and Andor reigns supreme. Like I feel like I've seen both those discussions, but if we
Mhm.
could specifically focus on Tivik a little bit here in this conversation that Cassian has with Tivik, are we more or less surprised that he kills him? I think this is a big sticking point. We've talked about it for years on the podcast. We've talked about Rogue One so much on Skytalkers, but I feel like I've seen people online talk about how it actually makes less sense that Cassian kills Tivik, but I disagree. What do you think about
I
that?
think I've kind of gone back and forth on it a little bit. Honestly, I do think it makes sense because once you realize that Tivik can't climb, I
Mhm.
think that for Cassian is the decision at that's when he makes the decision at that point. For him, I think it crystallizes everything that he heard from Luthen. And I think if that hadn't been the case, he might have made a different choice because I see where people are coming from about it maybe not making as much sense because the whole series we've seen Cassian not wanting to leave people behind.
Mhm.
And, we just spent all of episode 10 with Kleya of him repeating, I'm not leaving you behind. I'm not gonna leave you here. You can't
Yeah.
stay here alone. You know what I mean? And so
And
to
this
then
this contact is someone that apparently Cassian has had a relationship with for a while, is keeping this up, and that this guy is only trusting Cassian with this. It does sort
exactly.
of feel like this is a friendship in a way, even
Yeah.
though it's business, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think when you add the layer of what he's heard from Luthen and kind of everything that's at stake with if Luthen is right or wrong, the arguments that Cassian had just had with like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa in the previous episode. And I found myself thinking a lot about Draven, that guy.
Mhm.
And when he comes to Cassian at the end of Andor and is like, you're going to go to Tivik. And he's like, Tivik, we're getting messages about Saul from Tivik and like we're hearing about things on Jeddah. And if this is all true, what we're getting from these other sources that seem to have connections to what you heard from Luthen, this is either a trap and it's a great trap or it's all true. And I
Mhm.
think that is kind of Cassian's headspace. So then hearing the confirmation from Tivik of Galen, it's like, it's true. All of it, it's true. And now this is the most important thing. And I think that makes the decision for him. So I totally see where people don't feel like it's true to character perhaps anymore. But I think when you put it in the context too of the gravity of the information that Cassian is processing, I understand it.
And how important it is for the rebellion to keep that information
Mhm.
and it not fully get out how much they know too, because then if Tivik, like you said, can't climb,
Yeah.
it makes me think of Luthen and Young on Coruscant, and the reason why Luthen had to kill Young was that he knew too much and the Empire was onto him. And
Yeah, that's a good
Tivik felt
comparison.
the same way. He's like, I gotta go. They're on me. And then obviously when they come up to when the stormtroopers come up to them, that's when, or right before then, is when he kills him. So
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison between Luthen and Lonnie and then
yeah.
Cassian and Tivik. Like very similar kind of relationship probably.
I just want to hammer home a little bit something that we haven't talked about a ton, but the word climb actually it like rang a little bit of a bell when you were talking about the fact that Tivik can't climb. And I'm making a broad generalization here, but the concept of climbing is such a big thing in both Andor and Rogue One. Like Nemec's last words really were climbing through the Aldani Eye and like just keep going, like climb, just go do it. And then also that's the last word of K2SO in Rogue One as well.
Yeah.
And so then Tivik can't climb. I'm again making a big generalization. It's like, oh, he can't do it.
Wait, and then you know who else has to climb?
Who?
Ben Solo out of the
So
pit.
true. So true. Out of the pit. You have to climb. You have to keep climbing.
Well,
but it's clear that Tivik couldn't climb.
Yeah,
so,
there's something about like scaling a mountain, climbing a mountain.
Yes.
There's something like very like relay-esque about that, of reaching the next plateau, reaching the next height, like handing it off to the next person on this
exactly
endeavor.
And that's exactly what Rogue One is, by the way.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
is the imagery of Rogue One is often like, okay, Jyn puts it on her. She puts the plans on her belt, and then she has to go to the thing, and then like all of the posters and ads for Rogue One look like a running handoff. And then we finally, in the end of Rogue One with Darth Vader in the hallway, it's a handoff through these different compartments.
Yeah.
So just adding on to that.
Yeah.
Tivik was at the end of his road there.
Everything is a handoff to get to Luke, you know? And I think that's like what these stories like Andor and Rogue One are supposed to be highlighting, that it's not like Luke just like waltzed in and saved the day. Like you have all these other people that are passing the baton, as taking every chance they can get until they've run out, and they can hand it off to the next person who takes it and runs with it as far as they can.
Yeah, totally. Okay, some other stuff that stood out to me in this viewing of Rogue One is obviously it's kind of crazy to see how much of a character Melshi is in Rogue One and how he's just kind of in every scene.
Yeah.
And then it's ultimately insane that we don't actually see him die.
At this point, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, I was never like a Melshi person.
No, me neither. But then
Rogue One.
we get a big he's in so many scenes in Andor.
Oh yeah, huge.
Yeah. So I think that when we get to Rogue One, it's like, oh my gosh, he's there. And if you forgot about that, yeah, he's there. He's in the scenes. He's like part of the Rogue One crew. He gets stuck on Scarif, and we don't even see him die. We just see him dead in like the next scene. There's a cut.
Yeah. It's
which
sad.
is just unfortunate. But then it's also, I don't know. I've seen some people online talk about how like maybe that's just part of it. Like and I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it would have been nicer to see his death scene after spending time with him.
Why did Tony Gilroy pick Melshi to like pull him into Andor? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think once you watch Rogue One again, you see that this guy has lines. He's around here. He has a memorable face. Yeah,
he's been here.
Yeah,
he's saying some things. People know him.
Right. And so I think it's interesting, just the like renewed attention to Melshi. And now he's like a character that people.
He's great.
Yeah, he is great. It's just so funny. What else stood out for you?
I think it's really fascinating thinking about the shift of like main character in Rogue One, not from Jyn to Cassian, but that Cassian is kind of heightened as a main character in Rogue One, which of course he always has been. But also Jyn is the main character. Like, we know the
Yes.
most about her backstory. We know what she's lost. We know her father. We know Saw. We know her mother. We saw her as a child. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't get that for any other character. And that's always kind of been a bit of the point with Rogue One in a lot of ways. And like, it is Jyn's story, like even starting with the flashback, like we were mentioning earlier. But I think like now watching it with all of Andor, where Cassian was the number one character, it's interesting seeing how the energy kind of shifts in Rogue One to really kind of putting them both at that level, considering like how much we know about each of them now and about Cassian. And I don't know, I think that it just makes for such an interesting viewing experience because so much about Cassian's life was kind of unknown. And now it's not. And it's known in like a really big way in the show Andor, which is like one of the best things that has ever come out of Star Wars. You know what I mean? I just think that is something that's really going to continue to grow with every viewing of Andor and Rogue One. And we know what Cassian has lost. We know what he's given up now. We know what's at stake for him. We know who's waiting for him on the other side. And we don't actually know that for Jyn anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we have a lot of her story in books and things like that. But like, we know who's on the other side of Cassian in the rebellion as far as like Vel and Mon Mothma and Bix now and the baby, even though Cassian doesn't know that. But they're both kind of on equal footing, I think, now, as far as like the background that we have for each of them, which again, I just think I think it's interesting because that wasn't the original setup of Rogue One. Like, part of its point, I think, was that these people are so vital to what happened and we don't actually know them. There's that great line in like in the Rogue One novelization about Jyn and Cassian after they've sent the Death Star plans. I think about it all the time when they're going in the elevator, right? The like famous
The elevator scene.
the elevator scene that launched 1,000 ships. Like, I'm here on it. But in the novelization, it's really from Cassian's point of view, and he's talking about like how he's looking at Jyn and like this woman that he never got to know. And then the line is something like, of course he wouldn't get to know her. There wasn't time. Like, there wasn't the time. They were never going to have the time. And I think that, to me, that's always just kind of crystallized a lot of Rogue One characters. Like, we don't have the time. Of course we don't have the time because this is where their story ends. You know what I mean?
Totally. God, it's been a while since I've read that novelization. It's a really good one, though.
It's really good. And that, again, that particular line has always really stayed with me. Like,
Yeah.
of course they didn't have the time.
I feel like with Jyn's character, something that strikes me a little bit is that since we learned more about Saw in the second season of Andor, it hits like a ton of bricks, I think, that learning, and this is removing all ancillary material and Rebel Rising, the book and everything, but it hits like a ton of bricks learning that Jyn grew up with Saw's partisans. And Saw was, she says, he raised me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that after seeing the second season of Andor, it just makes Jyn look a lot harder, honestly. But then also, I think that my perception of Saw has completely changed from my original viewings of Rogue One, which I've talked about before in our discussions of the finale. But the concept that Saw is actually not crazy and that there were people spying on him, and the rebellion confirms that. But then on the other hand, we find out that Saw is basically a drug addict for
Rhydonium.
Yeah, what she calls Rhydo. And I feel like it makes me have like it does something for my imagination around like how the rebellion views Jyn. And then also like there is something interesting that that happens when you go from Andor episode 12 to Rogue One, where you're like, how'd they find Jyn? Like this was sort of left out, and maybe we could have gotten that mentioned in Andor in a little bit. Like, oh, we have this, we know Galen Erso's daughter, like we have some intel on that or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's ultimately quite interesting when Saw and Jyn are arguing before Jyn views the hologram of Galen, and Saw is like, Jin's like, you dumped me.
Yeah.
And Saw's like, you were a daughter of an Imperial science officer, and people were starting to figure that out for years, for the 9 years Rogue One has been out, I have been thinking that we were talking about the Empire,
Yeah.
who are beginning to figure that out. And now I think it's the Rebellion who are beginning to figure that out.
It could be
And so-
both, honestly.
It could be both.
Yeah.
But the fact that it could be both is new to me. And it changes the way that I see how quickly they were able to retrieve Jyn from that prison, bring her in the moment they found information and like confirm the information about Galen Erso.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's funny thinking about like how powerful the rebellion kind of seems when they go and get Jyn out of the prison, because when they first bring her back to Yavin and they're talking about it, and Draven is like, "Oh, we can just go put you back there." Like there's very much like a confidence there of like, we got you out, we can put you back. Like we'll just put you back where we found you. None will be the wiser. But then, through Andor and like everything, and like through Rebels, but really through like Andor, like having to see some of these characters, it's like we can see how hard these missions are and how they're not chill. And even when you go into Rogue One, like once they find out like about the Death Star, like they're all ready to pack it up. They're like, we can't win. We might as well give up, right? And that's the whole, rebellions are built on hope. What choice do we have? It's that speech for Jyn. So I do think that's kind of funny.
Totally. Also, like they wouldn't actually dump her back in that prison because then she would know that there's a pretty sophisticated rebel group on Yavin 4. Even though they cover her head, I still feel like she would be able to have that knowledge. They wouldn't be able
to
know.
Yeah. She would know. Yeah. What I do think is kind of funny is now, going into Rogue One, of course, the first scene where we have Bail Organa in, he doesn't say anything. He just like steps into the spotlight.
And the Force theme plays. It's weird. I think it's weird.
It's even funnier now though with Andor, given that it's like, oh, look, here's Jimmy Smits back as Bail Organa. He doesn't say anything. It's just
like it was already kind of weird that the Force theme played with him.
Yeah.
Like I could do the mental gymnastics to get there, of course, but
now
it's even weirder because it's like original actor is back.
Yeah.
And I'm it's funny because like I'm missing Benjamin Bratt.
Well, it's like you settle into Benjamin Bratt. He's great,
And the last conversation that him and Cassian had was so good. And I loved the interplay between them.
Well, in defense of the Force theme, the last thing that Jimmy Smith, that Benjamin Bratt says is, may the Force be with you.
See, I can logic myself into, I know why it's there. It's fine that it's there.
Yeah.
Okay?
It all works.
It all works.
What I think
it's just kind of funny.
I think it's very funny, actually. But there was a time 2 weeks ago when the finale of Andor played for the first time, where I almost thought that the last line of the show would be the last spoken line of the show would be "May the Force be with you," because then we go.
Would have been cool.
I kind of do think it would have been cool because then we go into the ending montage. But the actual last lines, which I think there's an argument for this too, the actual last lines are like Cassian and K2 talking about where they're going, and it's like pretty mundane. Like we've got a flight path. Here we go. And I think there's something to that. As actually, I think the last lines are from B2 when we transition back to
very true
Mina Rao.
Let's go again, he says.
Yeah. But there was a time when I like the first time I was watching it where I was like, oh my God, is this going to be the last line of the show? The last spoken line, "May the Force be with you," from Bail Organa of all people. Like.
That would be so good, actually.
I think that I'm sure they talked about it, honestly.
For sure. Or like even it is meaningful enough that it is the last line that Bail says to Cassian, or that conversation in general, and it takes place at the very end of the series.
Yeah.
Because
I think
if we're tracking, Revenge of the Sith, Rebels, and/or Rogue One, A New Hope all together, we're going from extreme knowledge of the Jedi and the Force to losing that, to gaining that again, and then getting back to ultimately the perspective in A New Hope of Luke really learning what the Force is, and that being like in a lot of ways the grounding for the audience. It's at the dead center of the Star Wars stories at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like a nice crescendo. So that makes sense to me that would be at the end of the series, if not the last line. It's not the last line, but it would be cool if it was.
Yeah, I think so too. I do want to go back. I want to talk some more about Cassian and Jyn and like the comparison between them, between Andor and Rogue One, because I think this is something I'm still kind of thinking through in my head. But before starting that, I wanted, you know, one of I think my favorite moments from season 2 of Andor is when Cassian is talking to Naya in the first episode and the whole conversation they have about her joining the cause at that point. I it's one of my favorite scenes I think from season
I
2.
agree.
Yeah, and the conviction with which he talks, you really just see this like genuine charisma from Cassian as a character and someone who's like in the rebellion, right? Or in the cause, I guess. I think that really kind of hits harder too when thinking about Rogue One, because I think through season 2, we start with Cassian in like he's like very for the cause and like what he's doing with Luthen. He's helping bring people in. He's very like, this is all worth it. This is what makes it worth it. Like being here with you in this moment when you step into the circle, when you come home to yourself, right? But then I think through arc 2 and 3, we really see Cassian, he struggles, I think, with joining the rebellion, leaving Luthen, staying with the cause, everything it means for his relationships with other people. I think he really struggles with that. And like we saw him want to leave all of this after the events on Gorman. But I think that everything that happens with Jyn in particular in Rogue One, it kind of feels like a return to that Cassian from those first moments of season 2. Like I think he realizes that he's with Jyn as she's stepping into the circle now, as she's coming home to herself. And he says that to her when they're about to leave Yavin 4, like welcome home.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's like to the rebellion. I think it's like to her stepping up to the cause. And
Yeah.
Naya says, if I die tonight, was it worth it? And he says, this makes it worth it. This right now, being with you, the moment you step into the circle. You made this decision long ago. The Empire cannot win. You'll never feel right unless you're doing what you can to stop them. You're coming home to yourself. You've become more than your fear. Let that protect you. And I think that is I think he would say the same thing to Jen in another, like,
Mhm.
version, because that's what happens for her, and she's the one who, like, steps up. For her, this becomes everything worth fighting for. In an instant, this becomes worth sacrificing her life for, whereas in the beginning of the film, she says, "It's not a problem that the Empire flies its flag if I don't look up." And she's like, "I've never had the luxury of politics." It's not what she's going to do, but now it's worth everything to her. And I think the fact that she's the one delivering this message to the council, to the alliance, while Cassian is off getting people to like join in because he knows how it's going to go. I don't know. It's like I feel like that episode 1 energy is what we see in Rogue One from Cassian again.
Cassian getting the group together emphasizes, in order to, go rogue on the
Yeah.
mission, is emphasizing what that force healer said to him
Mhm.
about being the messenger. To me, that is part of being the messenger.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good thing to talk about too is Cassian and Jyn both as messengers and also this idea of the clear path ahead of them.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
we talked a lot about the Force healer and what she says about Cassian. But I had totally forgotten that Cassian tells Jyn that she's the messenger in Rogue One. When they arrive on Edo and Jyn wants to go with Cassian to save her father. And Cassian has the ulterior motive at this point in the film that he's going to kill Galen. Obviously, that's not what ends up happening, but he tells Jyn that it's not he says, no, your father's message. We can't risk it. You're the messenger. Which we've talked so much about Cassian being the messenger. And it's kind of like, in some ways, he passes the baton to Jyn in some ways too here, because Jyn is the messenger. She's the one that
Hmm.
tells the Alliance what the message said. She's the one that like physically pulls the lever to send the plans out. Like, again, obviously Cassian is there for all of that, but like, and he is the messenger too, but like
She
she
becomes
has
the
the
main
final.
messenger. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And she when she tells the alliance, she says, my father gave his life so that we might have a chance to defeat this. Everyone doubts Galen. And then you think about, a day ago, Cassian was having the same conversation with Mon Mothma and Bail. And he says Luthen gave his life for this information. And they're all like, okay, but like, do we really believe Luthen? And Cassian knows because he tells Jyn, he says they were never going to believe you because they didn't believe him 24 hours ago about this same thing. So I think that's such an interesting, both of them in this role as messenger, and how ultimately it's not even important like who does it the best or like has the most important message in a lot of ways, because it's like it's all part of the same effort. It's all about pushing the lines forward, like in Nemec's speech of, you know, everyone will keep pushing forward until finally one more, it's like it's too much and they can't hold the lines anymore. The other piece is the clear path. The Force healer, when she's talking to Cassian, she says, thank you for that feeling, the clarity. It's been a very long time. I thought it was gone for good. It's so easy to lose faith. They come no matter what. Sometimes it even works. But this, all that you've been gathering, the strength of spirit, surely you must feel it. That's from episode 7 of season 2. And then Chirrut, when he's talking about Jyn and Cassian also on Edo, it's that conversation about if Cassian has the face of a killer. And
it's Baze who says it's between them.
Yeah, it's between Chirrut and Baze, but Jyn is there. And he says, does he look like a killer? No, he has the face of a friend. Who are you talking about? That's Jyn. And they say Captain Andor. And then Chirrut says, the Force moves darkly near a creature that's about to kill. Which I think is really interesting when we think about the comparison between Chirrut and the Force healer and their perception of Cassian and how it's different. But then when Jyn leaves and Chirrut goes to follow Jyn, Baze says, where are you going? And he says, I'm going to follow Jyn. Her path is clear. And that word choice, I feel like, is very specific. The fact that Tony brought that kind of word choice into Andor, I think is specifically a callback here. But I was interested to know your thoughts on like the way that, again, like Chirrut seeing the Force moving darkly around Cassian, whereas the Force healer has like a different perception of Cassian and the Force.
Well, I don't think that Chirrut has the perception of Cassian 24/7 that the Force is moving darkly around him.
Just
I think
in that moment.
Just in that moment, because I think we can see, and this was another like new thing I noticed in Rogue One, I guess, is just you can tell how much Cassian doesn't want to kill Galen.
Yeah.
He's frustrated by those orders. And I feel like I noticed that before, but it's heavier now, right? Because of all the things that he's learned about this name, and also knowing that sometimes people change sides. I don't know, stepping into the circle. It's like Galen was potentially stepping into the circle, so why kill him? And I think that it was that indecision with Cassian, and that I think is what Chirrut is suspecting about Cassian. And because of that, his path wasn't clear. Cassian's path wasn't clear because he didn't know
what he wanted to do.
He didn't know I think he didn't want to do it.
Well,
but
he wasn't sure what was going to
happen. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think what is interesting about the concept of the messenger is I just think it switches between Cassian and Jyn, and then they become like sort of one when they're on Scarif.
Yeah.
And the clarity of purpose, I think, switches between them as well. In this long line of us starting season 1 Andor to going to Rogue One, I think that clarity of purpose is something that Cassian needed to find that in season 1 of Andor. He has it in season 2. It's
he questions it.
He questions it in season 2. I think the love aspect complicates that, but then he finds it again through Jyn in Rogue One, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think probably seeing someone at that juncture in the war and the rebellion commit so wholeheartedly to it, like Jyn does, I think probably like reminds him of that feeling again. And like all of this has been leading to this moment, like everything he heard from Luthen, now everything he's learned about Galen and Jyn, like it's all, I think I keep using the word like crystallized, but it is all like coming together to a point where he can't, like he has to be pulled into it, and he wants to be, and like into that energy as well.
Yeah, there are some fun comparisons between Jyn and Cassian too that I like. One that I feel like we haven't really hammered home before is that, you know, Cassian's mother died and her final message was a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
And the final thing that Cassian wanted Brasso to tell Marva before he found out that Marva was dead was that she'd be so proud of me. I'm doing this. Like, she'd be so proud of me. You would be so proud of me.
Stop it.
I know, it's sad.
It's so sad.
But then the final message for Galen to his daughter is also a hologram. And both these holograms are supposed to inspire and push those lines, like Nemec says, forward. And the last line that Cassian says to Jyn, the last line that they say to each other is, your father would be proud of you. It's like you can draw this direct comparison from Cassian saying that, wanting to say that to Marva, never getting to say goodbye. It's the thing that we talk about with Cassian, but then echoing that to Jyn. They are kindred spirits in this way. And I think that there's so much like sort of annoying arguments online about how we're supposed to read Jyn and Cassian as a couple. Do we care about as a ship, the romance of it all? I'm here to say, like, I just am uninterested in those conversations because I do think that these two characters are destined in some way. They're destined to die on that beach, and whether or not they found solace in each other's arms at the very end, like, that's beautiful, and that doesn't take away from the relationship that Cassian has with Bix, which I also think is beautiful and meant to be, and from childhood, and they obviously have a baby, and that's hopeful. And I've waxed poetic about how I think that's a fantastic message for the end of Andor, but there's so many parallels between these two characters that you can't ignore it, and it's the reason why they're, by the end of it, and also with conjunction of the onslaught of this amazing series of Andor, we have like co-protagonists in this area of Star Wars now.
Yeah. I also just think like the shipping discourse, it's like, why are we still doing this? And
exactly.
It's like, you can
we can have both.
Want.
It's okay.
I'm happily on both ships. So
Same. I think that's and I understand why people would be like a little shut down by some comments that people make. I get it. Okay. But I also think that we can have both, and we do have both.
We quite literally have both. Like,
yes.
I don't know. I'm like, Bix was away for a year by the time we get to Rogue One. It's not like it was the next day, you know? I mean, it's fine. I'm happily on both ships, which I will say has never really happened for me with a character that has like multiple love interests.
Let's think about, did it not happen for you for Han Solo?
Yeah, I guess that's true. Star Wars.
I've talked about this many times, how it is a feat of nature that they were able to do that in Solo.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess I was thinking of like, I don't know, like other like outside Leia, of outside of like other Star Wars stories. I usually I get pretty set on like, no, this is my OTP in this series, and none shall pass. No others shall pass. But yeah, Solo is a great example, and now we can add Andor into the mix too, Cassian. So anyway, yep, I'm with you on the shipping.
Anyway, the beautiful comparison I think of. My mother would be proud of me to your father would be proud of you, I think is just glorious. And I think it's hard also. I've seen some people say this, and I do understand the fact that we've spent so long, like maybe the longest we've ever spent with a single character now in these two beautiful seasons of Star Wars. And then we move into Rogue One, and the ending really kind of focuses on Jyn and everything, and we're like, now we're witnessing the death of this character that we spent so long with, Cassian, right? And it's like we're really like Cassian's last words are about Jyn. But if I can take it to the next level, he's saying those
to himself,
to himself as well. Yeah, and we have clear evidence of that parallel.
Yeah, again, I think it is kind of like passing the baton too, of like these emotions and what you said of what Cassian wanted to hear, what Cassian wanted to give to his mother is something that he can give to Jyn, and that is also for himself as well. Yeah.
I'd also love to talk a little bit about how this last viewing of Rogue One made you and I both think a lot about how Jyn and Saw's relationship, which is explicitly this like weird pseudo father-daughter thing, like Jyn saying he raised me, is a lot, right? And then you can compare that relationship, which is like this anarchist Saw rescuing Jyn from a hole situation, to Kleya and Luthen, actually, and what we saw in episode 10 of Andor of Luthen rescuing Kleya from a hole. and how they have this complicated relationship of who's the boss, who knows who's the boss. But Kleya is doing a lot of things herself, like is the master communicator. Luthen teaching her the ropes of being a rebel. I think there's something there that Star Wars just really loves to tap into, whether it's father-son, father-daughter, mother-son, mother-daughter. Well, we haven't really gotten a lot of mother-daughter, to be honest, but I guess we did in the Acolyte, but like barely, you know?
Yeah.
And the like parent-child relationship can look so many different ways in Star Wars. And this is another one of those instances, I think, that I just hadn't thought about Luthen and Kleya potentially paralleling Saw and Jyn until Rogue One.
Yeah, and I think the ways that we even talked about in our recaps that Luthen is kind of from the Rebel Alliance's perspective, Luthen is kind of a different version of Saw in the way that they both act independently of the larger organization and how that can honestly cause problems for people like Mon Mothma and Bail. Yeah, that there's a parallel between the two of them there. So then thinking about Jyn and Kleya, there is that parallel between them too and those relationships and kind of how each of them turned out, I guess, in a lot of ways. The fact that Saw, abandoned Jyn, and that was never something that happened with Luthen and Kleya. They just ended up working closer and closer, and their network actually became more insular than Saw's did, to each of their detriments, I would say, in the end. That Saw had these spies that were in his organization. They were talking to the Rebel Alliance and potentially other people, and Luthen and Kleya kind of slowly lost everyone they worked with, it seems like, to the Rebel Alliance, and then it was just the two of them really at the end there. I will say that some of the interviews that have come out about Luthen and Kleya, and particularly from Kleya's actress, Elizabeth Delau, I do think there are some things that were probably not really explained very well in their relationship, because the way that she's talked about it in some of these interviews, talking about episode 10, which she did such an incredible job at, is that like really in those flashbacks, like we're supposed to infer that Luthen is responsible for Kleya's family's death, like Luthen specifically, not just like the empire that Luthen was with, but like him specifically. And so then like their whole relationship and her growing up, there's always this component of hate and of revenge that is kind of in the back of Kleya's mind. And especially when we get to episode 10 and everything that she has to do then. And I'll be honest, I never really got that from what we see in those flashbacks. I think I see a young girl who is incredibly hardened by what has happened to her, but I never interpreted her as blaming Luthen for that. And it seems to me like that was a part of Elizabeth and Tony's kind of understanding and creation of the character, and particularly of that flashback and everything that's happening in episode 10.
It does seem like some things were cut out from that flashback. There's some other scenes that were mentioned as well that did not make the final cut. So I do get that is probably part of the character exploration. But it's not how I read it. So our conversation around that wasn't really focused on the fact that Luthen was responsible for the murder of her parents. It's not what I got from that scene. I got, Luthen's is shell-shocked and he sees a little girl and doesn't want to, in sort of is quote unquote like forced into doing what he needed to do, I guess, in the organization that he's a part of, and then doesn't want anything to do with it. And then leaves, taking this little girl with him. That's what I inferred. And then also Elizabeth goes on to say that the relationship is not father-daughter, which I don't think that like you don't have to read it as father-daughter, okay? But I do think that it's when they have the conversation of when young Kleya is like, "What? I'm your daughter now?" And what does he say? He says,
"When it's useful."
When it's useful. I think you're supposed to think about what sort of relationship that they have, and potentially the closest thing that you can attach yourself to is father-daughter, because they're bringing it up. And so then you look through that lens and you find what can be love there, and we see that at the end of his life, right? Like and I guess like the shade changes a little bit when you hear about the perception that he killed her entire family, but that's not how I read that first scene. So I don't know. I think it's a little, like you said, it's interesting how there are things that were part of the character profile that I feel like did not make it to the final cut.
No, yeah. But I think, if we took some of that into our reading of Kleya and into our comparison between Kleya and Jyn, that I think Jyn also has definitely these feelings of anger and probably hate towards Saw and what he put her through and abandoning her when she had already lost her parents as well. And so I think that can be part of the conversation with these two women. But yeah, I just don't think that element of hate towards Luthen specifically was ever a part of my reading of Kleya as a character. I think Kleya has always been like a very
fiery character.
Yeah, a very fiery character, a very like hard as nails kind of character. Like she's the one that shakes Luthen out of his crash out, and we saw that a couple of times throughout season 2 specifically. But I never read that as like her hatred of Luthen because of what happened when she was a child, even seeing her flashback. So
yeah, and then I guess even comparing, if we can take this relationship and compare that to Jyn and Saw, we haven't seen a ton of that, right? But we do know that Jyn is pissed that Saw dumped her, as she says.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that like she spent a lot of time with him. She says that he raised her. Like, what does that mean? Right? I think that, would Kleya say the same thing about Luthen? Who's to say? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I kind of think she might when pressed.
Yeah, I think she might too. I think she might too.
It's a good transition, I guess, to talk a little bit more about Luthen. By far, the most frequent comment we got after our finale episode is that we missed this key detail. And
we missed it.
We did miss this key detail. It is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. So we missed the fact that Luthen's real last name is Lear. So Rael is an anagram. We spent a lot of time in our finale episode talking about how Rael sounds like real, but it's not real. So we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about how what is real, what is true, what's fake, who is fake. We didn't really even talk about the fact that Luthen says only 2 things in this gallery are like considered to be, I don't have the quote in front of me, considered to be of questionable origin. And so no one knows like whether they're real or not. And we had talked about how just it doesn't really even matter. But several of our listeners pointed out that it's interesting that Luthen says that because there's 2 people, Dedra and him, who are in the store. And yeah, they're both fake too. So it's interesting. And so when Luthen says, what about the blade? Is it real? And he says, we still don't know. The tension mounts. And what a great line. But the big revelation is the fact that we learn that Luthen's last name is actually Lear. And this just does a lot of things in my head. And I know it did a lot of things in your head, dear listener, because we got so much messages about this. It's so crazy. But we missed it. And as much as I was an English major and I have read King Lear, the Shakespeare play, it's been a really long time. And it's a complicated one. King Lear's a complicated play. Have you read King Lear, Caitlin?
No, I've never read King Lear.
Okay, so I did copy a Sparks Notes quote because I thought that it was just an interesting thing to look at in comparison to talk about Andor. Because when Luthen's last name is Lear, we are, as a character who has such epic soliloquies, like maybe the best one in the entire series, it is Shakespearean. It's downright Shakespearean. So of course his last name is Lear. It just makes sense. And I do think that in a lot of ways, Luthen is like the king of it all too, who loses everything, you know? So King Lear, very complicated play. And I'm just going to read from Sparks Notes. So if you are unaware of King Lear the play, you also can be grounded in this and think a little bit about why his last name would be Lear. Quote, King Lear is a brutal play filled with human cruelty and awful, seemingly meaningless disasters. The play's succession of terrible events raises an obvious question for the characters, namely whether there's any possibility of justice in the world, or whether the world is fundamentally indifferent or even hostile to humankind. There is goodness in the world of the play, but there's also madness and death, and it is difficult to tell which triumphs in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that describe Andor in a lot of ways?
Yeah, and I think Luthen as well, the idea of burning his soul for the sunrise he never gets to see. And what we've talked about so much with him about the choices he has to make, and he has to make them so that others don't have to make them, and how far he's willing to go morally himself for the greater good and for taking down the empire, which is terrible and morally bad, you know?
Yeah. King Lear dies in the end. And there is a sense of nihilism throughout the entire play. And I was struggling a little bit to make sense of how I can compare this to Star Wars, because Star Wars is ultimately very against nihilism. It is hopeful to its core. And Tony Gilroy says, there's nothing cynical about our show in regards to Andor, but I do think there's something cynical about King Lear. Because of that, I do think that there are similar themes, though. The tragic ending, the sacrifices, the confrontation with death, having daughters is a big part of King Lear. King Lear has I think 3 daughters, and one of them symbolizes death in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I was in my head, I was like, does Kleya fall into this symbolism of death? No, I don't think she does. Right. I think that I can push this as far as I can, but I don't think she does. It's meaningful that his last name would be Lear, this way that this play really symbolizes sacrifices. That's Luthen's whole character. That's how you can sum it up. It's so pointed that Tony Gilroy did this.
Do you think that Luthen is nihilistic as a character?
No. I don't think so. I think his entire speech is not nihilistic at all. I think it's the sunrise I'll never see is not nihilistic at all. That's nihilistic would be him saying, there's no point in anything.
Yeah.
There's no point in me going after this fight. We all will never see sunrises.
Yeah.
For what I'm doing. Like, that would be the difference, I think. And I don't think he's like that.
I agree. And Stellan and Elizabeth Delau have both talked about this in regards to Luthen and Kleya, and about how each of them must have immense amount. I think the word Stellan Skarsgård uses is empathy, and then the word Elizabeth Delau uses is love, and that they both must have extreme empathy for those around them and love for the galaxy in order to be doing the very difficult things that they are doing.
Yeah, I'm when someone pointed this out, the first comment that we got, I was like, oh my God, I cannot believe we missed this, because it is so ripe for discussion.
I know. I was like,
yeah,
Charlotte's going to be upset about this.
Yes. And boy, I was. But as you can see, I think that what King Lear, the play, pulls on is something that I think the show Andor is pulling on in a lot of ways too. But not to get too existential, but I do think that a lot of everything is referencing Shakespeare, right? Like in every piece of art that is created now, like, it often references Shakespeare. So of course, like, this would reference Shakespeare, but I think that the spin that Andor has on this viewpoint is hopeful.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's hopeful. What I think is kind of funny is that somehow, like, this is season 2. And this, like, never kind of entered our discussion circle until the end of season 2 about Luthen Rael.
Like, the fact that Rael could be an anagram for Lear.
Yeah. And, like, I'm sure people were talking
there's a
about
chance,
it.
Yeah, there's a chance that I had that written down somewhere, but then was like, there's not much here. So I mean, like, there's a real chance.
Who's to say? Yeah. It's so funny that it's the finale and it's like, no, guys, like, it's obviously Lear. It's like, oh my God, you're right.
Anyway, super interesting that that's his last name. But I think it makes it more, I think it, like, that just adds another layer to our conversation about real, not real, like burning your life for something that's real.
Yeah.
Like what Luthen says originally in that first arc of Andor. So good. Another thing I really wanted to talk about is the set design. I don't think we spent enough time talking about the set design in Andor, and I think that it has the potential to change the way that Star Wars is made going forward, because I think the set design is so well done. And I do think we talked about this in our recap of season 1, so I just have to give ourselves some credit there. But something I've seen pointed out online that I just think is worth mentioning, and is in addition to a conversation that we had in the first arc of season 2 around stepping into the circle, the fact that circles are such a big thing throughout season 2.
Yeah.
Even at the Mothma wedding, stepping into the circles for the ceremony. Yeah, the ritual. But circles are seen throughout the entire season 2 set design. Everything is round. It's so intriguing. Once you realize that, you're like, wow, everything really is round. And we're moving towards, I guess, the crystallization of the symbol, the rebel symbol. It's different than the Andor symbol, but like that one is particularly round. And I think that the season 1 had so many, like all the doorways are octagons or hexagons. They have these rigid edges that are reminders of the Imperial cog in the wheel, the symbol of the Empire. And by season 2, we're just moving closer and closer to circles and roundness.
Yeah, I think it's one of the huge benefits of having both of these seasons now to like really look at as a whole. And I think you get better clarity on some of these, like these design choices that they were making of, specifically in season 1, we're going to have more rigidity and more sharp edges to certain design set pieces, like doorways, for example. And then moving into season 2, we're going to be rounding it out more. And there is something to read and interpret in this set design, specifically as it relates to the Imperial symbol versus the Rebel symbol, and like where we are in the timeline and where our characters like Cassian are moving towards and into.
Yeah, there's so much subtlety, I think, throughout Andor that I think will take us years to peel back some of those layers. Another thing that's super interesting is Elizabeth DeLau made reference to the fact that what's her name? Susanna
White, I think.
Susanna White, yeah. One of the writers, I think in season 1, gave most of the characters a reading list and like a watch list. And only one thing was mentioned, because we don't have the list. But the point of me saying this is I want the list. But one of the things that was mentioned was Shoot the Woman First by Eileen McDonald. Intrigued by that. So I'm intrigued by the fact that they had a list of things to watch and read. Yeah, and because I think that it might shed light a little bit more on some of the decisions. So this is my plea. Please release the list.
Yeah.
I want to see it, because I think Rian Johnson's list of movies that he wanted the crew to watch was so helpful in understanding The Last Jedi and like the shots that they were doing or some of the themes that they were hammering home. So interesting to have that list and to see that as an audience member. It's fun to go through that. So I definitely want to check out that book, Shoot the Women First.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where we also say, wow, I hope that both seasons come out on DVD and Blu-ray with a ton of bonus features, especially from like all of these department heads, because we know how like integral they were to the success of Andor, and that everyone on the cast that has talked about them like sings everyone's praises. Like the costume designer Michael, I can't think of his last name right now, I'm pretty sure his first name was Michael, but everything he did, we've seen like some interviews with them, obviously with I think his name was Luke Hull, who's the production designer and set designer. I don't know if that's his official title, but he was, obviously in charge of like Ferrex and everything moving into season 2 and things like that. And I just really hope we get time in like bonus features to celebrate and learn about these people and more about them and all of the work they did, because it's incredible. Like it truly is incredible to think about the way that all of these pieces came together for a show like Andor. And it's just a masterpiece, truly. And we are getting the Art of Andor book, which is very exciting.
And I'm thankful. I'm so excited for that.
I'm so excited for that. I figured that would come. If anything was coming, it was going to come after season 2 and that they were going to put them together. So that makes sense.
We still don't have an Obi-Wan Kenobi one, and it's driving me crazy.
Like the concept art for the Obi-Wan Kenobi show would just have to be so spooky and like freaky. And like, I need to see it. Deborah Chow, Ewan McGregor, please.
I know.
Hear my cry.
I know, and they're coming out with one for the Acolyte. Like, come on, let's get one for the Obi-Wan Kenobi too.
We still need one for the Book of Boba Fett, right? And
true, and Mandalorian season 3.
Yeah, I mean, there's still, and like we're gonna need one for Skeleton Crew as well. So,
is there one for Ahsoka?
No.
God, we need that one.
That would all like the way that the Obi-Wan Kenobi show and the Ahsoka show art up books, like
it would have star placements on my shelf.
It really would. And anyway, whatever.
Money is being left on the floor.
It's being left on the table. Like, okay. But yeah, I really am excited and hopeful for like the bonus content that we'll get from Andor now that it is complete. And I really hope that they go to town on that, honestly. Like, I would kill to have some episode commentaries on these DVDs or bonus features, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, need it.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say before we move too far on is, if you're like, what's that book about with Shoot the Women First? It is a 1991 book by Eileen McDonald based on the author's encounter with female terrorists. Through a collection of interviews, McDonald analyzes the subjects, their reasons, and their modus operandi. So definitely probably informed Dedra as a character. And honestly, maybe Kleya. I don't know. How do you define a terrorist? I don't know.
I think so.
Intriguing, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need the bonus features. We need the ancillary material. We need and I have to say, I do feel like they're doing a good job with it. If you don't know, every week they had a pretty long YouTube video around the previous Andor arc, going through the episode and the choices, and they're way better than I could have even asked for at this point. And if you haven't watched those, you're in for a treat. They're great. So the point of me saying that is they exist. So let's expand them and put them on a Blu-ray.
Yeah, it's the closest thing we've gotten to a Rebels Recon in years.
Yeah.
So, and they were fantastic. They were like 15 to 20 minutes for each arc, honestly. So, like, great. And that's what I was saying, where like we've gotten to hear from like the head of the costume department and production and design and things like that, and like Tony and the writers as well, and the cast, of course. That's where we've gotten some really great and interesting tidbits about the show and its production. They're called like the Andor Declassified, right? Really good. So if you haven't watched them, I'm really jealous, honestly, because that would be a great way to kind of get some new Andor content if you haven't already seen it.
Yeah, highly recommend.
Yeah. I think I can kind of feel us wrapping up, but I think one of the last things to just touch on, we had talked about this a little bit in our prep for season 2 episode, and like where we kind of looked back on season 1. And one of the things we talked about was how, it was definitely a specific choice that Cassian doesn't have a big speech in season 1. And we were kind of curious if he was going to get one in season 2. And what ended up happening is like Diego Luna actually talked about this on his press tour, and, was talking about how Cassian's speech is in Rogue One. Like, that's where his moment is. And I just thought that was worth bringing around because we did kind of talk about that, and how, like I said, it was a choice that Cassian doesn't have a moment like that in the way that Luthen or Marva or Nemec or even Mon Mothma does, but that Cassian's personality is one where he's still able to reach people in really vulnerable moments that we see throughout both of these seasons, like with Naya, like with Kleya, like with Mon Mothma even. He's able to pull people forward, to keep using this relay race metaphor, into the next like length of the race that they need to go on, to keep the rebellion moving. And that's something that's always been really interesting about his character. And like I was talking about earlier with, of Jyn, of watching Jyn kind of come home to herself and joining the rebellion and joining this cause that's greater than herself, and how I think that that's something Cassian responds to in her, throughout Rogue One. Again, it makes sense that would be the moment that he gives his speech, that while Jyn is in there trying to convince the Rebel Alliance of what she's heard and how important and how vital it is that they go now, Cassian knows they're not going to believe her, but it doesn't matter to him. He's already with her, and he's already gathering others to be with her as well. And he's using that charisma to convince all these other people on Yavin to join him and to break the rules, which I'm sure a lot of these people have already heard through the grapevine that Cassian got in trouble the other day for breaking the rules and coming in on this ship that wasn't authorized. You know what I mean? So they're
For
like,
sure.
going
That was the
again?
talk of Yavin. Yeah.
Yeah, like that was the gossip of the night over at the Yavin 4 cantina. And he's able to convince all these people to join him in this and to join Jyn and the message that she has from her father. And yeah, I really do think that line of "they were never going to believe you" has really kind of hit a lot different for me now, watching Rogue One, considering he was just in there in the same situation as she was 24 hours ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really hits home because I feel like you really have seen Cassian fail a ton already with them. So he knows about deaf ears.
Yeah.
But then also the line that Cassian says to Jyn when after they get back on the ship on Edu, and Cassian's like, "You're in shock and looking for a place to put it. I've seen it before." What do you think that line refers to? Because I've been thinking about it for a couple days, and I think we're talking about Kleya.
I think we can infer Kleya to that. Yeah, I think that would be something to connect to that moment. Definitely.
Right. That like all their Kleya and Cassian's relationship has been tumultuous. They've kind of thrown different insults at each other, I think. Maybe not insults is the wrong word. I just feel like they've had
a hardness. There's a hardness to Kleya.
Kleya's always kind of pushed Cassian in the right direction too. But Cassian convincing Kleya to get on the ship, she was in shock around all of that too. And then Kleya in that situation was incredulous over whether or not Yavin 4 would accept her. What's the point of it? This is kind of like all there was.
My refuge is Yavin.
Yeah. So I think that line has something that I can attach to too, but also like I bet there's several occasions throughout Andor that we could maybe say that that's what Cassian was referring to too, but I immediately thought of Kleya.
Yeah. I think he's definitely seen it before in Kleya,
for
and
sure,
probably in other people too.
I just feel like there's so much now in Rogue One that's like so many layers, way more than before. It's so fun.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I've watched Rogue One twice now. Once like before season 2 and then once after. And I feel like I had different viewings each time, obviously because I didn't have season 2 with me when I watched it right before. But I think it's definitely like that. This is just such the gift of Star Wars, and how this franchise operates is that the addition of these new stories throughout time just get to add layers onto the pre-existing stories, and that's been how it is for forever with Star Wars. And it's really exciting that Rogue One kind of gets to join that, because Rogue One did that for A New Hope, right? And now Andor gets to do that for Rogue One. And I don't know, it's really cool and like just such a treat of Star Wars and the way that it does storytelling.
And Andor does that for the original trilogy as a whole too.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget that. I feel like sometimes in our conversations we've forgotten that like the what we see in Andor, the building of the rebellion, it heightens the stakes of the original trilogy even more.
Yeah.
Understanding how much went into the like grassroots organization. Previously it's like when you see them set up on Hoth, you're like, gosh, it must have been a big headache to move from Yavin to Hoth. And then now they're moving again. God, like having this realization, and then seeing Mon Mothma in Return of the Jedi, and she's kind of like shell-shocked herself, I feel like. A different Mon Mothma, like quite literally a different Mon Mothma, but also like a different Mon Mothma.
Right.
Also, Genevieve O'Reilly has said that she doesn't think that Mon ever sees Leia again. And that hurts.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. I don't know. I'm going to block that.
So it's sad. So again, that's what I mean about when you see Mon Mothma in Return of the Jedi and she's kind of like glossy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like she has this, the way she delivers the news about the second Death Star and everything, which again, the second Death Star of it all, I think it's always been kind of like in pop culture as like, it's kind of silly that they built another one. But the fact that they built another one, it just is like, in the context of the story, it's so frustrating. It's like we went through all of this work to destroy this one, and that was big. But they're back with another.
Now they're just here building a freaking another one.
Yeah, and they're here with another one, and we have to destroy it maybe the same way, maybe a different way, and we have we got to take out the head too, which is Palpatine.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's like the Mothma that we see in Return of the Jedi, with the knowledge of what Genevieve O'Reilly says, is she never saw her daughter again. She never saw Perrin again. She gave it all up for the rebellion. Yeah. And so the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
When you're just focused on the original, like our trio, Luke, Leia, Han, you like forget about this. And now we have all this information.
Yeah, about these other people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. We need to make sure we're bringing the original trilogy into that conversation more often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, great show, great series. Set a new bar, I think, for Star Wars, personally.
Absolutely.
So I can't wait to see what happens in the future now that the foundation, I guess, has been laid for such a high quality show. We need another spy thriller, I think. Like, I don't know where, maybe in like the Resistance time period, that would be great. But I wish we could get Tony Gilroy back to Star Wars again. I know he's adamant that he needs a break, but he has been way more pro Star Wars than I've ever heard him. So maybe the answer isn't a complete no, like he says.
His break. It's fine.
He just needs a vacation, which I get.
Yeah, he needs his own beach town to go to for a while.
I'm just like, this is why Andor needs to win an Emmy, because
that's what'll bring him back.
I don't know, maybe.
Maybe, or he'll be like, well, I did it. I don't need to do another Star Wars show that needs to win an Emmy because I already got it.
I don't like to hear that. I feel like he nailed it.
I need him to come back and write the Leda show where we see what happens to Leda. I'm telling you, she's such a treasure trove for stories. Would love to see. But yeah, a fantastic show, fantastic film, 10 out of 10. I love Star Wars. So
amen.
Amen. I think that is going to wrap it up for us on Skytalkers today. Thank you so much for joining in on all of our Andor discussions. We may or may not have one other thing coming down the pipeline regarding Andor. So definitely follow us if you're interested to see what that is. It should be coming out pretty soon.
That's probably next week.
That's vague, but pretty soon. And yeah, if you want to keep up with us online or tell us what connections or the ways that Rogue One has changed for you, maybe the ways it hasn't, we would love to know. Please let us know on Twitter /X at SkytalkersPod, or our personal handles. Mine is at Caitlin and Pleasure, and Charlotte's is at Clarity. We also have our Instagram, our TikTok, our Facebook, our website, skytalkers.com. Just search Skytalkers on your favorite social media platform of choice and you will find us. And if you have a couple seconds and would like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would so appreciate it, as it helps other people find our show. And if you're interested in other ways to support us and how to get involved in our fabulous Discord community, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out our different reward tiers there.
I want to say a huge thank you to these patrons: Joey, Matza, Jackson, Lauren, Sarah, Kelly, Diana, Susanna, Cherie, Katie, Hannah, Z, Jason, Stuart, Thomas, Neil, Derek, Amy, Fifi, Suki, Bailey, John, Daniel, Sam, Swara, Shelby, Sophie, Joanna, Catherine, Ella, Tom, Jennifer, Savannah, Allie, Blessed Cheesemaker, and Adam. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.